There's a subtle difference between wanting approval and needing it. Most people like being appreciated. They want their message answered, their work noticed, their opinions respected. That is normal. But when your sense of security starts depending on how other people react to you, something changes. You begin checking who viewed your story, rereading a message because the reply felt slightly different, changing an opinion when someone important disagrees, asking, "Are you sure you're not mad at me?" even when nothing obvious happened. None of these behaviors seem powerful enough to matter, but together they create a pattern. The more you need other people's reactions to feel certain about yourself, the more those reactions begin to influence your behavior. And that creates a strange question. If someone can predict what you will do simply by controlling how they respond to you, how much control do they actually have over you? The obvious explanation is insecurity. Someone needs reassurance because they don't feel confident. Someone checked for approval because they doubt themselves. That can be true, but there is something deeper happening. External validation turns other people's reactions into information about your own worth. A positive response tells you, "I'm okay." A cold response tells you, something is wrong. Silence becomes suspicious. Disagreement feels personal. Distance feels like rejection. And suddenly, your emotional state is no longer determined mainly by what you think or believe. It starts fluctuating with the environment around you. This is where predictability begins. Imagine someone who becomes anxious whenever a particular person stops replying quickly. That person doesn't need to say, "Do what I want." They only need to become distant. The anxious person may start reaching out more, explaining themselves, apologizing, changing their behavior, trying to restore the previous warmth. The other person has discovered something important without ever saying it. Withdrawal creates a reaction, and once a reaction becomes predictable, influence becomes much easier. The mechanism is not simply attention-seeking. It is dependence on external feedback. When your internal sense of certainty is weak, you naturally look outward for signals that tell you how to feel about yourself. Did they approve? Did they laugh? Did they respond? Did they agree? Did they choose me? The problem isn't receiving those signals. The problem begins when you cannot comfortably tolerate the absence of them, because then reassurance stops being a pleasant addition to your life and becomes a regulator of your emotional state. And that changes your decisions. You may say yes because you are afraid someone will be disappointed. You may stay quiet because disagreement could cost you approval. You may adopt an opinion because someone you admire holds it. You may tolerate behavior you dislike because losing the relationship feels worse than losing your boundaries. And this is why validation can become connected to control. Control does not always look like commands. Sometimes it looks like rewards and withdrawals. Warmth when you behave the way someone prefers. Coldness when you don't. Attention when you agree. Distance when you resist. If you're highly dependent on their approval, you may begin adjusting yourself without being asked. That is the important part. The strongest influence often doesn't require an order. It creates a situation where you voluntarily change your behavior. Consider a simple example. You send someone a message. They normally respond within minutes. Today, they don't. At first, you continue with your day. Then you check your phone. Nothing. You check again. Still nothing. Now your mind starts creating explanations. Maybe they're upset. Maybe you said something wrong. Maybe they're losing interest. So you send another message. Then another. Eventually, they respond casually. "Sorry, I was busy. The situation is over." But notice what happened before the reply. Their silence changed your behavior. They didn't ask you to send another message. They didn't tell you to worry. They simply became unavailable, and your need for reassurance filled the silence. The same pattern can happen at work. A manager gives someone less praise than usual, and suddenly that person works harder, agrees more quickly, avoids disagreement, and becomes desperate to prove their value. Or in relationships, one person becomes emotionally distant, and the other begins abandoning their own preferences just to restore closeness. The person seeking validation often believes they are protecting the relationship, but sometimes they are teaching the other person exactly which emotional button produces a reaction. This is where the uncomfortable part begins. Not everyone who notices your need for validation is deliberately manipulating you. Some people may not even realize they have influence over you. And sometimes the problem isn't another person at all. It is the pattern you have created. If every uncomfortable reaction from someone else causes you to immediately change yourself, you have effectively handed them a remote control. Not because they are powerful, because you have made their approval powerful. This is also why constant reassurance rarely solves the underlying problem. You get the reassurance. You feel better for a while. Then uncertainty returns, and you need reassurance again. The cycle becomes self-reinforcing. The more you use external approval to eliminate doubt, the harder it can become to tolerate doubt without it. And there's another uncomfortable distinction. Confidence isn't the absence of rejection. Confidence is being able to experience rejection, disagreement, uncertainty, or disapproval without immediately abandoning your own judgment. That doesn't mean becoming cold. It means being able to hear, "I don't like this," without automatically translating it into, "Therefore, I must change." This reveals something much larger about human behavior. People don't only respond to what we say. They learn from what reliably changes us. If criticism always makes you defensive, people learn that criticism can provoke you. If silence always makes you chase, people learn that distance brings you closer. If disagreement always makes you retreat, people learn that pressure works. If praise consistently makes you comply, praise becomes an effective way to influence you. Again, this does not mean everyone around you is secretly calculating your weaknesses. Human beings simply learn patterns, and your behavior teaches other people what works. That is why emotional independence is not about becoming indifferent to everyone. It is about creating a small space between what happens to you and what you do next. Someone disapproves. You notice it. Someone becomes distant. You feel it. Someone criticizes you. You consider it. But you don't automatically obey the emotion those events create. That pause matters, because influence becomes strongest when there is no pause between stimulus and reaction. So why do people who need constant validation become easier to control? Not because they are weak people, not because they care too much, and not because seeking approval is inherently unhealthy. They become easier to influence when their decisions repeatedly depend on restoring someone else's approval. The deeper issue is not that other people have opinions about you. It is that their opinions can become instructions without ever being spoken as instructions. A delayed reply can make you chase. A disappointed expression can make you surrender. A disagreement can make you doubt yourself. A withdrawal of affection can make you abandon a boundary. And eventually, you may mistake your adaptation for your personality. You think that's just who I am. But sometimes, who you are in a relationship is partly shaped by what you have learned you must do to keep receiving approval. The real freedom begins when you can accept something uncomfortable. Someone can misunderstand you. Someone can disagree with you. Someone can be disappointed in you. Someone can even leave. And you can still remain capable of deciding what you believe, what you accept, and how you behave. That is when validation stops being a requirement and becomes what it was supposed to be all along. Feedback. Useful sometimes. Pleasant sometimes. But never your source of identity. The moment you stop needing someone's reaction to tell you who you are, their ability to control your behavior becomes much smaller. Because the easiest person to influence is not the person who wants approval. It is the person who cannot tolerate living without it.